All right. Hello, Fortina's brothers and sisters. Welcome back to Ministry Revealed. It is another late one. We finally, for the first time in months, had a family dinner. We went out for dinner with the whole family. You guys know we're not vaccinated, and my side of the family, they were all vaccinated, and they still didn't want to have dinners until the youngest 12-year-old niece was vaccinated. So finally we were able to go out and just enjoy family dinner like we used to for so long until all this craziness started. So it made for a late one today. I wanted to make sure I gave enough time to this last video. I gave 5 days in between. Usually it's 3 to 4 days, typically around 4, but I gave extra time to this one, and it was done on purpose. I really hope people take the time to absorb what was in that video, because I'm not saying it for new people so much, but those that have at least been around for a little bit or a long time, because it sealed the deal. It sealed the clarity, and it's one of those things. I know many of you guys are gonna be like, dude, Alan, you don't need to seal the deal anymore, right? The Lord has given it, right? The Lord has revealed it to us. His Spirit has opened the book for us. So I get that we don't really need any more evidence, but what these things are doing is not only proving it out more, it's giving greater details. All right? It's all about the details. And the reason is because these events that are going to take place. A great example is when we talk about these chapters to years. All right, these chapters to years, these are all the books that have opened to us in an understanding that within these chapters, are events related to the end of days. And we've talked about it a lot over 4 years and built on it and developed it more and pulled more out. It's been incredible. But the reason for these isn't just to show how incredible his word is, but it's to give us greater understanding. It's to give greater detail on this is to come. We know that the Old Testament, from creation to Christ, was the was. We know from Christ till where we are now, until the moment of the escape, we are living in the is. And from the moment of the escape forward is the is to come. And this ministry is the revelation of the is to come. And as you guys know, it's this revelation of the is to come that not only revealed the is to come, but gave us greater clarity in the is on so many mysterious things that have been confusing for so long. And it also gave us greater clarity in the was all the way back to creation. Now, why do you think that is? Well, of course, because there's this one piece of scripture we all know very, very well, right? Ecclesiastes 1:9. The thing that has been is that which shall be. So the thing that's the Old Testament has been is the thing that shall be, okay, in the is to come. And that which is done, meaning the is that we're still living in until the moment of the escape, is that which also shall be done. So what was shall be, what is that we're still in shall also be. So everything over the 5,000 or so years, from almost 6,000 years from Adam, in all the Old Testament up to Christ, in all the New Testament stuff that were right up to the point to the escape, all those things shall be. I've talked about it before, but that's the type of stuff that just, it really rattles the brain when you think about it. Because what it means, and I've shown this before, is all of this stuff that we're currently in over the last 2,000 years, and all the Old Testament, 2,500, whatever, thousands of years, all of it in the end of days is going to play out over 14 years. It's crazy to consider. It's just so wild to ponder, but that's what's been revealed. These things that were, these things that are these things that shall be. And that applies to the pharaohs, the king of Babylon, these types of characters that were so wicked, and the next one more wicked than the next. In the end of days, those that were so wicked back then won't even be able to compare to those characters in the end of days. That's how scary, that's how terrible it's going to be. But you see, all of this revealing, all of these open books are to help prepare, to help give understanding, for us to leave behind, for us to study it, for us to download, put with our leave behinds. Because as it continues to get deeper and deeper and reveal more and more and more, the greater understanding, the greater the revelation, the greater comfort in knowing for those who will be in it, to understand these things that were said before the time began, so that once it's happening, they can take comfort in understanding and having greater understanding of what to do. You guys know that I believe there's still a lot more to come, obviously, in relation to what's happening in this ministry and many of us in this ministry. But just when we think, man, how can we get even greater detail? I mean, we've been given so much detail. But if you remember, in the last video or second last video, I had mentioned about going further into Moses, going into Joshua. Well, this is going to turn out to be a very big teaching, and it's not going to be over one video, because today I'm going to start with just things that were still taking place in the world right now, and what these events of the this global pan, what's going on, and what appears to be these lifting of restrictions and so forth in so many parts of the world. I want you guys to clearly see. I know many of you guys do, but I know there's a lot that don't. I'm going to show you little clips to show you how clear it is of what this entire plan was. And I'm going to remind you that in the very first video I ever did, it's right there in it. And that was all the way back in June of 2017. And then from there, I want to get into a question. One of our sisters, I think it was Nancy, had sent me a message about Judas, right? How was it that Judas died this way and he died this way? How is it that Judas was the one who bought the land and Judas was the one who couldn't have bought the land because it was the priests? And so we're going to go into that discrepancy. And as we build into that discrepancy, you guys are going to see it so clear. You see, because there's one thing we know very, very, very well in this ministry, and that is the revelation of who the Gospels are speaking to. That revelation is what gives us the understanding. It is the first revelation we ever received, and it is that revelation that gives us the understanding to open up all these things that the church has called controversy, or that they've called it discrepancies within the Bible. We have proven these things out over and over and over and over and over again, dozens and dozens of times throughout the scriptures. And we spoke about it in the last couple of videos, showing how seminary schools and how they word things and they fall for what they believe, realizing that it doesn't really answer the question. You could say, I'm looking at it from this way, and he's looking at it from this way, and he's looking at it from this way. So you got three angles of looking at something. But if it was just one person standing in the middle and it was three angles, you're still looking at that one person. It doesn't explain the fact that somebody else saw two people. Now there's an issue. Those aren't solved by saying it was just points of view, right? And so we've spoken about that and we've revealed those things. Well, we're going to talk about that and how we explained how the church should just say they're mysteries built into the scriptures. These things that we haven't been able to understand yet. Okay? That's what we've been given revelation of. That's what we've been able to reveal, and we're trying to show with anybody who will listen. Well, today we're going to do a good chunk of the focus on that story with Judas, because we know there's more than one revelation of Judas. All right, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to break it down. You're going to see it. It's going to be so exciting, because what it does is it led me to other pieces of scripture in the Gospels that we've spoken of before. But when I read these things in the past, this portion about Moses and where Moses is spoken about, it never dawned on me, because I just didn't have that understanding yet. Not until preparing for this video and realizing that, or knowing that I was building on this Moses, and Moses relates to the house of Israel. He's like the one that gets them to the promised land, but he's not able to go in, and he doesn't take them into the promised land. Moses is a crystal clear picture. The life and story of Moses is a crystal clear picture of the beginning from the escape to the end of seals. And Joshua is a crystal clear picture of the time of trumpets, of Moses then passing like a John the Baptist. John the Baptist dies, and right, Christ is there, and now Christ takes over, who is Joshua, Yeshua, he was called in Numbers that we shared before. We're going to talk about that. And so it was a great little piece how I was building on this video today with this Judas portion, and I was just building it as a piece to start. And as I continued to build it, I got more and more and more detail, which led me to more information. And it just so happened that the information that it led me to in the Gospels was directly in Mark, directly who it's to, and it's not found in Matthew, because somebody else is there at that time, no longer the Moses typology. It was awesome. So we're not going to have time to go all the way, do everything Moses and then do everything Joshua. But what you guys will be able to do, we're going to take it to these key points and prove them out in other pieces of scripture that we've already understood. And we're going to do this Moses portion in the second half, as it goes further along. But in a future video, we'll do the Joshua one, and when we do the Joshua one, we'll probably still do another one in the future, God willing, depending with all these other things I'm working on and that you guys are sending me and interesting stuff to look at. That then what we'll do is another one that will encompass both of them together to show the typology of seals to the end of trumpets, from the beginning of seals to the end of trumpets. And the reason I want to do it is because what I was talking about here a moment ago, these are what we call chapters to years. What I'm talking about now isn't about chapters to years. It's about the typology in their life within the books about them. Okay, so we're going to be in the book of Exodus in some parts today, but we are not looking at the book of Exodus in this chapter to year story, which has been so beautifully proven out in reverse within seals and trumpets. We're not talking about that today. So don't get confused when we're talking about it and thinking that it's a chapters to year thing. That's not what we're doing today. What we're doing is his life and the typology of his life to the typology of Joshua's life in the big picture, in the events, the key events that you could pull out. And when you see this today with the one with Moses, you're just going to say, oh, of course it is. Of course it is. You see? And anybody that's new in this ministry, or that is just new, even and this is one of your first videos that you're hearing, you are not going to have a clue what we're talking about unless you come to this playlist right here, the Revealed End Times Study Note Series. This playlist here is key. at least these very first two videos will begin to give you the understanding of what we're talking about here that's been revealed. They're preached everywhere in the Lord. And what that is who the Gospels are speaking to. All right, let me put this back here. There you go. So this is called the Intro to the End Time Gospels Revealed, which is who the Gospels are speaking to. This is a 30-minute intro to begin to understand why we didn't just have one gospel. Why not just, instead of three synoptic, why not just one gospel that laid it all out and gave all the details? There was a reason, and that reason has been revealed here in this ministry, and it was the first thing that was revealed to us. And this is your intro to it. 30 minutes of your life studying scripture to understand something you've probably asked all your Christian life as to why were these differences here. You're now going to have answers to those questions. And what ends up happening is, in seeking these things in the end of days, you're going to realize, as you begin to understand this more in relation to who the Gospels are speaking to, you're going to realize there's not just one set of 7 years in the end of days tribulation, but that there are in fact two sets of 7 years. One for the sleeping church, one for the sleeping house of Israel with the Gentiles that are grafted in. And the other 7 is for Judah, for the Jews, the house of Judah. It's 7 years of seals, and there are 7 years of trumpets. That's 7 years of seals is speaking to Mark, which is the sleeping church portion. And then you've got the 7 years of Judah, which is the Matthew's portion. And that's seals and trumpets. As you begin to understand the first one, that's what you're going to begin to understand in the second one. And one of the biggest questions you're going to have next is, how on earth was all of this missed? Well, I believe it was timing. It just wasn't yet the timing that the Lord wanted these things revealed. If everybody knew that they should have been learning from Luke to understand the escape and to understand all things, nobody would have been studying from Matthew. Nobody would have been studying from Mark. And I believe this was just all purposed, obviously, by the Lord. And so if you come and then watch the big video after these have really, really piqued your curiosity and really started helping with some questions that you had, you come and watch this third one, and you will see how all of these things got missed, because all of our lives we've been taught from a focused viewpoint of the Gospel of Matthew. Whether it's the end of days, Matthew's discourse, or just the gospel overall from Matthew, and then taking a little bit of Mark and a little bit of Luke to fill in the gaps that are in Matthew. However, you can't do that with everything, because it doesn't always work. You see, that becomes an issue because there's still things that don't make sense. And that's something we're going to talk about today on a couple points. But in particular, we're going to talk about this with Judas and the differences about it in the Gospels, and then how that's going to lead us in to this portion with Moses, which is going to relate to the first 7, which relates to Moses and the portion of seals for the house of Israel. Sorry, 1 second. All right. Oh, 1 second. Okay. So the other thing you can do is, as you've come to read these, watch these, follow along, you can always go to our website, ministryrevealed.com. You can go there right from here at ministryrevealed.com. And right on the homepage, you can download the book we wrote last year in March, so just about a year ago almost. You can download it for free. You can get the ebook on Amazon, or you can get the paperback on Amazon as well. Or you can go to the book page on the website and start reading the book right there from the website. You don't have to worry about downloading anything. And the reason I recommend that is because as you begin to understand these things about the Gospels and the 14 years and all this other stuff, the book will give you even greater detail. So that's why it's always a good recommendation after you've begun to understand in here. So let me go to what I wanted to share first. Like I said, we're I wanted to share first about these events that have been going on in the world, that some people and a lot of people right now are saying that, oh, everything's falling apart, right? Their whole scheming plan is all crumbling around them. It's all falling apart, and all the countries are beginning to raise their restrictions and everything else. Well, I want you guys to understand in a few simple minutes, crystal clear, you will begin to understand that this was part of their plan to bring about what comes next. I know many of you get that, but I know there's a lot of new people. I know there's a lot of people that aren't paying too much attention to these things, that they follow what others might be saying and thinking that it's all falling apart and everybody's about to go back to normal. That is not going to happen. Listen to a few of these things.
To kick off, actually, and get a bit of a scene setter from Mr. Gates, because this is, I know, a topic that you've spoken on again and again. You were ahead of the curve prior to the beginning of this pandemic. Where would you assess where we are today in beating COVID-19?
Well, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines. If you do surveys in African countries, you get well over 80% of people have been exposed either to the vaccine or to various variants. And so, what that does is it means the chance of severe disease, which is mainly associated with being elderly and having obesity or diabetes.
What? This was in February. So now it turns out that newest one, right, the O1, is kind of like a vaccine itself. And that the most risk of the population were the elderly, obesity, diabetes. But everybody had to get it, right? It was all about bringing the entire world into this global pan, you know what I mean? It was all part of the plan. You're going to see this. And here's the other thing. I was going to share this the other day, a couple of videos ago, but there were other things that were more important that didn't really tie into bringing something in near the beginning. But look at what's going on in Hong Kong, guys. Hong Kong is going through the roof. They're calling it the same Omicron one, and it's going through the roof. My mother-in-law was telling me about this about 10 days, 2 weeks ago, about how they're lined up on the streets, still cold. It's still pretty cold in Hong Kong, and they're staying out all night, hours and hours and hours, trying to get into the hospitals because it's now a massive surge. So the reason I'm saying this is to say, as this built up again, because another round is coming. You see, I've often said it that it was kind of like they're kind of the opposite side of us, right? All the watchmen and women around the world thinking that it was like 2018, 19, and here these guys are building something. Then 2020, this starts. And then we're thinking, oh, the time is at hand, and it's not quite yet. And what do? They give us some freedoms, and then bang, something else comes, another variant. And then it comes, and we think, oh, maybe now is the time of the escape. Have we understood more? Now's going to be the time. And what happens? It doesn't happen yet. Bang, then another variant comes. It's almost like they're running in conjunction, waiting for that moment. And it reminds me of that in Romans. I think it was in Romans, where it says, the creature is waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God. They're waiting for that moment that the bride of Christ is taken. That is the manifestation, the turning to light of the bride of Christ, the sons of God, the children of God. And so it seems like it just, they're almost ready to give another one, to give another one, to give another one. You see, but it was more than just bringing these about and fear and doing all these things. It was about what was going on in the background. You see, a lot of people think that this has now gone away. Like where I live in Canada, I live in the province of Alberta and I live in the city of Calgary. But in Alberta, you see, we were the last ones out of the provinces to follow what the government was mandating with these passes. And the reason they did is because we are the oil capital in the country. We are the oil rich province. But when oil prices were so low and people were staying home, well, there wasn't any revenue. The provincial revenue that comes from oil and gas was really, really low, and there was deficit. So what happens? They need federal government money. So if they don't fall in line, then too bad. You won't get the money. Well, you know what happens where I live? Because the price of oil has been shooting through the roof, the money going into the coffers in the province where I live went up $10 billion for this year. That's how much they make. I don't know if it's a buck, a portion. It's a portion they make off of every barrel. And so they forecast it. And so now there's like this abundance of $10 billion in the province for projects and spending and everything else. So that's why our province, Alberta, it wasn't because of the truckers. It was the timing of the cost of oil, of the price of oil going up. So ours was the first one to say, boom, we're releasing everything. No more of this, no more masks as of the beginning of March, and everything is pretty much done with. So the thing is, oh, it seems great. It seems like everything, like people are saying, oh, their whole system, their plan is crumbling and falling apart. Well, no, I hope and I pray for our leader where I live in my province, that he's truly on our side, on the side of the Lord, and he's in my prayers daily. But in the end, in the coming months, does it really matter? Do we really think this has gone away? No. This was the entire plan to bring about what will follow after this. And this is a great example. This is from Forbes magazine. And this is what she wrote. This was a writing, an article that was done. I think it was just a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Can't tell, man. Every day is kind of blending into the next. And it says, while the United States government has not issued a federal digital vaccine pass, okay, they didn't do a federal one, just like Canada, they did have one, but there were variations. So then it says, a national standard has nevertheless emerged. So in the US, just like other countries, it hasn't been released yet. But you see, even in the US, there has been a national digital vaccine standard that has come to pass. And it says to date, 21 states, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico offer accessibility to Smart Health Card, which is a verifiable digital proof of vaccination developed through the Vaccination Credential Initiative. So, of course, you want to go look into this. So you go and look into it, and what do you find out? Empowering individuals to gain access to their verifiable clinical information. So this is all about their health records, not just vaccine, but it's their vaccine records, their clinical records that will all be on their digital smart cards, all right? Their new digital IDs that are coming out. This was the purpose of the entire pandemic. This was the purpose, to have it in place before everything hits the fan. And it will hit the fan starting with the escape. Oh, yeah, sure. Seeing something coming first, I believe, is the thing. But this time that we've been talking about in June is that period of time when all of this will begin. And you see, this was one of the keys. digital vaccination records, and your health records. Let me show you something else. This is from Canada. This is the president and CEO of the Canadian Bankers Association. We'll listen to a little bit of this. It's not very long anyways, it's only 2 minutes. But let's have a listen to what he says.
Canada is on the cusp of a revolutionary innovation that will transform the way Canadians authenticate themselves online and protect their identity. Digital ID. All of us are living in a digital world, but we're tethered to an analog model of how we identify ourselves. Memorizing countless online passwords, carrying government-issued licenses, plastic cards, and more. Digital ID is a way for Canadians to identify themselves to government, businesses, and each other electronically, with ease and rock-solid security, without the need to present physical documents. One interconnected network. A federated digital ID ecosystem developed in collaboration with Canada's best and brightest talent from our banks, telecommunication companies, law enforcement, and government. It would have the power and security to store every Canadian's electronic identity and attributes. And it would unlock countless opportunities for Canadians to verify who they are safely, quickly, and securely, while only revealing the information necessary for each transaction. A fast, easy, and secure way to bank, sign up for government services, renew driver's licenses or health cards, shop, travel, and more. Canada's banks are perfectly situated to help lead the creation of a federated digital ID system between government and the private sector. The World Economic Forum agrees that banks and financial institutions should lead the path forward for digital ID. Banks are highly regulated and trusted. They have advanced cybersecurity and privacy technology, and they have the infrastructure to operate.
All right, so you get what I'm getting at. You see, what is connected with all this? Healthcare, right? Your health records, right? The digital ID will have your health records. It will go to your banking. It's going to have your credit score. It's going to manage everything. You see, if you remember again, like I said at the beginning, with the first video I ever did in 2017, there was a part 1 and a part 2 on the 16th, 17th, but it was the same video, just split into 2.5 hours. And we talked about how this PCR, right, was this positive ID company. Okay, this positive ID company, let me bring it up here. This company, Positive ID, is a digital ID company that for some reason is involved with PCR machines and the testing of people going in and out of countries, testing for pandemic, during times of pandemic, to test people for disease going in and out of countries. And I had showed how nobody knew what a PCR machine was back then. And here the digital ID company was the one doing it, was the one with this. And they worked with so many of the companies that we know, right? All the government agencies and everything else. Well, if you go to part 1 of the video, which I haven't talked about in a while, here's some of the acquisitions that the old company called Verichip that everybody spoke about. It was all this mark of the beast for so long. Well, when they changed to Positive ID, there was no longer a lot of talk about it, right? Because they could just change the name and people go back to sleep. Well, what you find out is, you read in here, Verichip also acquired a company called Digital Angel. Digital Angel had the RFID frequency for tracking. And don't forget, Verichip was the one with the PCR machines to track people coming in and out of countries through times of pandemic. Well, what else did these guys do? They acquired another company, Jam Technologies. That's the RFID portion. And watch this. Here's the other one. They actually acquired a company called SteelVault. Maybe you can't see it, but it's called SteelVault. And SteelVault is a provider of credit rating and monitoring your credit report and identity theft. What was this guy just talking about? The banks being the ones to do it. What was this one talking about? Your health care records. All of these things were connected to this company. And then you've got this one here. This is also with Verichip, the same company, Verichip, that became Positive ID. You see, they also merged with another company called Receptors through the development of Verichip partnership, which of course now we know is Positive ID. And do you know what these guys do? Check this out. These guys do chemistry platform, applied development, research product, influenza virus. These are the guys right here. These are the guys. Here it is. An integrated sensor system for the detection of biothreats from pandemics to emerging diseases to bioterrorism. This was back in May 2009. And this was from a video I did June 16th, 2017. Guys, the entirety of this right here, the entirety of this was for this purpose. The whole thing was to bring about this digital ID. So all those thinking, oh, we can go back to our lives. Oh, it's all crumbling around. It's not going to be what they thought it was. Yes, it is. And what did they get to build in this time? They also got to build these camps too, didn't they? Remember, we saw videos of people in the camps around the world, in particular in Australia and in other areas. They built them in Canada too. There was something in the government in one of the sessions that we watched, and they were asking about these places that were being built. Do you think now that they're just going to lock all those doors and all that's going to be empty? No, because we know what's coming next. And it's not their victory. It's the Lord's victory. But it's going to be through chaos, of course. All right? So let's remember this. The thing that has been is the thing that shall be, and the thing that is the thing that shall be done. Because there's nothing new under the sun. Now let's get going into this portion here with Judas. This is actually really fun, because what you find out, those who have studied this, I'm sure probably every single one of you listening have looked at it, have tried to understand it in some portion. And if you've been around this ministry long enough, you probably have a pretty good sense of it. But it's these other details that tie into it and what it leads us to going into Moses. That's just so much fun in opening these things up. So one of the issues, of course, is in Acts chapter 1. In Acts chapter 1, verse 18, it says, Judas, the man who bought a field and fell headlong, his body burst open and his intestines spilled out. That's a pretty intense picture. I was telling my wife about it today, and she was like, and then, of course, we have the Matthew 27 description. And it says the priests were the ones to purchase the field. You see, and listen to what they say. This is Christianity.com website. But in Matthew 27, 6-7, we see the priests were the true purchasers of the field. Well, that's not true. You're going to see. There's prophecy. There are prophetic events built in to the Gospels that people haven't been able to understand yet. That's what the mystery is. That's the mystery. Okay? It says because of the blood money for 30 pieces of silver. But that's not what the scripture says. You see, if you go to Acts chapter 1, let's look at exactly what it says. Okay, it's talking about Judas here in verse 18, Acts chapter 1, verse 18. Now, this man purchased a field with the reward of iniquity. Does this say he threw the money in for his guilt and it was the priests who purchased the field? No, it doesn't. It says it was this man. But you see, when you don't understand, as we've been saying so often for like 4 years now, when you don't understand who the Gospels are speaking to, and all of your foundational understanding, even though you're completely unaware of it, your foundational understanding is based in Matthew. And when your foundation of understanding is based in Matthew, you have to justify things that can't be understood by saying, even though it said he was the man who bought the field, when you read it in a different way somewhere else, in a completely different way, you have to say, oh, we see that it was actually the true purchasers were the priests. That's simply not true. And this is something, as I said, we spoke about a couple videos back. And these are things that come out of seminaries. Am I bashing seminaries? No, not at all. They just have not yet understood. There's only a few thousand of us, guys. There's only a few thousand of us around the world that have begun to understand these things over the last few years. And everybody, most everybody that we try to have conversations with, shun us, turn back to Matthew, don't know what to say, try to give an answer that they don't understand, instead of just saying, oh, that's interesting. Can you explain that to me more? You see, I can't explain why people are reacting the way they do to it, except the Lord has his plans. There's going to be a reason why there's only few of us right now. And one day soon, either in his presence or in heaven or with him during this portion of time that he's here for those chosen workers, the revelation will be given. The understanding will be given. And I think it's connected to that. Okay, so this clearly can't be true. So the question then becomes, well, which one's true? Which one did already happen? Acts chapter 1 or Matthew 27? You see, because then there's this other controversy, right? It's not only who bought the land, but within that one verse, you have this controversy now of, did he hang himself or did he fall headlong? And do you know what I've heard? Look at this, theory 1, theory 2, theory 3. Listen to this one. Listen to theory 2, this second portion right here. The story of another traitor is detailed in 2 Samuel 17:23. When this person saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his home city. He set his house in order and hanged himself, and he died and was buried in the tomb of his father. You're like, so? So they go on in this theory that's taught that they've used that one to parallel what Judas did. You're like, what does this have to do with him falling headlong? You see, there's everything must be explained away in theories, yet Scripture isn't a theory. It's truth. So if there's a discrepancy or an apparent discrepancy, as everybody has understood all of these discrepancies throughout Scripture, there must be a reason. And we have the revelation for them. It's all about who the Gospels are speaking to. That reveals the whole thing from start to finish. That is why the Lord revealed that to us first. That was the beginning of the entirety in this ministry after the mark of the beast and that stuff started it. When I first realized something was going on September 8th, 2017. That's when it all began. And it was the opening of the Gospels that came first. So let's look further into this. We see now this man purchased a field with the reward of iniquity and falling headlong, he burst asunder in the midst. Man, it's just so brutal. He burst asunder in the midst and his bowels gushed out. Now, here's the thing. Here's another thing. You'll even hear about explanations that, oh, he was hung. He hung himself, and it was over an edge. And when he hung himself, then the branch broke and he fell and gushed everywhere. Well, that's not what it says. And then you read, other people will say, oh, he was hanging for so long that he swelled up and swelled up and swelled up so much. And from the gases inside the body, poof, he exploded. All sorts of crazy things get explained away because it just can't be understood. Well, you darn well better believe it could be understood in this ministry, because we know that there are mysteries in the scriptures of things that haven't yet been completed. Things like, how about this? What about these 30 pieces of silver, right? Remember this with Judas, right? Matthew 27. Judas, and he receives the 30 pieces of silver. And what does Judas do? He cast down the 30 pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hung himself. And then it says, and the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful to put them in the treasury, right, because of the blood. And they went and bought the potter's field. And as you study these things, you say, that is clearly not what we were reading in Acts. Acts chapter 1, it's not the same story. So how is this possible? Were there two Judases? Or is there a mystery in one of them that's something relating to and is to come? Because what you're going to find out is when you go to these stories, you see, when you go to the stories in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in Matthew, we've talked about this before, right? In Matthew, what did we see? We saw he covenanted with them for 30 pieces of silver. And then in Matthew 27, you see it talking about the 30 pieces of silvers. He repented himself. Then he throws it into the temple. He hangs himself. And the 30 pieces of silver, the priests use and go buy the land. And then you see something down here as well. And it says, then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet. And they took 30 pieces of silver, the price. And you say, well, wait a second. If you go look into the prophet Jeremiah, you do not see the 30 pieces of silver. You see that he bought land. So you have that typology that he bought the land, but it was bought for 17 pieces of silver or something like that. 17 coins of silver or something along those lines. And you say, well, wait a second. Not only is there discrepancy because you got Acts and you got Matthew 27, but why would it say Jeremy the prophet? Well, you're going to see a little bit more about that it wasn't specifically meaning Jeremy the prophet or Jeremiah the prophet, but that there are books like the books of Moses or the book of Moses. You're going to see that a little later on. That if I said, go read the book of Moses or the books of Moses, what would you have done? You would go to the beginning of the Bible and it's the first 5 books, right? They're the books of Moses or the book of Moses. Well, the same is happening here with the book of Jeremiah, because the book of Ezekiel or Zechariah, I should say, not Ezekiel, Zechariah was a minor prophet. So when they were talking about prophets or the book of the prophets, back in the day, they would call it the book of Jeremiah or the books of Jeremiah, in the book of Jeremiah. And you had the other prophets and you had the minor prophets in there as well. Because this is why you see 30 pieces of silver, yet in the book of Jeremiah, there is no 30 pieces of silver. You'll see this as we talk a little bit more. How about what this one says here? Oh, there's a problem. This is on this site, right? So what did Judas do with the money? As we saw in 27, he cast the silver into the temple. In 18, Acts 1:18, he bought a field with the money. Judas could not have done both. And when you see this explanation being given here, it's the same explanation that we were sharing a moment ago. And you see most people would agree that that's what it was. that, oh, is because it was really the priests who did it. But it's not true. You still can't explain away the wording that the scriptures gave us. It's crystal clear. In one, he bought it, and in another, he threw the silver into the temple. Here's another piece. We have, see, is it messianic prophecy? We're going to talk about this in a moment because it's a very key piece. But down here it says, a seemingly difficult fact, a seeming difficulty is the fact that Matthew attributes the prophecy to Jeremiah, not Zechariah. The explanation is twofold. First, Jeremiah is also bought a field on the Lord's command. This is what I was telling you about a moment ago. Second, the Hebrew Bible divided the three sections into the law, the writings, and the prophets. The prophets began with Jeremiah, and it was common for people, this is what I was telling you a moment ago, it was common for people to refer to the whole section, which included Zechariah, as the book of Jeremiah. Zechariah's, I thought there was something happening here when I saw dual fulfillment. It says Zechariah's prophecy had a dual fulfillment. One, in the prophet's contemporary context. Well, yes, but again, the one in Jeremiah was with 17 pieces, and it says, and in one for a future, a distant one. And it says the Jewish people of Zechariah's day would be judged as seen in the breaking of favor and the specific details regarding 30 pieces of silver and a potter's field for a future fulfillment in the betrayal of Jesus Christ by Judas Iscariot. Now here's the problem though. If this was the actual fulfillment, then how could we also have what's in Acts chapter 1? Something's not jiving, right? This is something that causes so much distress within churches, so much with people that say, well, if the Bible is true, why are there these discrepancies? Something is missing. And that's what we share in this ministry. You see, as we shared in Matthew 26, we see the actual amount that he gets is 30 pieces of silver. But when we go to Mark's discourse, when we go to the Gospel of Mark, what do we see? And promised to give him money. No amount mentioned. When we go to Luke, the story in Luke, we see that Judas Iscariot was covenanted to give him money. So out of all of it, we've only got one that talks about actually giving him money. Let's see if I've got this one here. One sec. No. Let me go back to where I was. So what happens is it's only from Matthew's gospel where we see the actual amount described as 30 pieces of silver. And this makes a difference because as we've shared these things with the differences in the Gospels, these things within these differences and being in Matthew and knowing that they relate to trumpets, knowing that what the scriptures have told us in Ecclesiastes, the things which were shall be, and the things which are shall be. Which means if we look at something in the Old Testament, it's going to play out again in the is to come. And if we take something that was in the is of the New Testament, it's something that's going to play out in the is to come. This is what we've proven out over and over and over again. If you guys remember, here's another example. This is one that always has people scratching their heads. The sign of Jonah. Right? For as Jonah, in Luke 11, Jesus says, for as Jonah was a sign unto the Ninevites. What was this meaning? 40 days. As Jonah was a sign unto the Ninevites, so shall also the Son of Man be to this generation. Now, we've been taught this, and we've talked about it many times. We've been taught that this related to Christ after his death and resurrection when he was here for 40 days. But it's not true. Jesus did not do as Jonah did to the Ninevites when he resurrected from the dead. He did not go around warning them of the impending destruction that was coming if they didn't repent. He didn't do that. He didn't do as Jonah did during his 40 days after his resurrection. This was prophetic. And we've taught on this. You see, what other things you will have heard in church is that they say the 40 days typology was really 40 years to when the destruction of Jerusalem came in 70 AD. That's not true either. Because your same church that will tell you they believe Christ was crucified, died, and resurrected in 33 AD is probably the same ones telling you, if they're talking on prophecy, are the same ones telling you that this related to 40 days as years being 40 years later when they attack him. Well, that's not true. That would only make it 37 years later. Why? Because they can't understand that this was a prophecy not yet fulfilled. There was no queen of the south that rose up against them. You see? Well, what about Mark? This is always a great one because when you show this in Mark, this is what causes all the confusion. Because when they ask him in Mark chapter 8, it says, he sighed deeply in a spirit and saith, why does this generation seek after a sign? Verily I say unto you, there shall no sign be given to this generation. And he left them and entered in a ship again and departed to the other side. This is what causes all the issues within the Synoptic Gospels in relation to the story of Jonah. He told them nothing and he left. This means the Mark group. This means the sleeping church. They're not going to have a sign. We've taught on this before. We've proven what this means. But if you're trying to prove it out scripturally in a shadow or in the type of the is and what happened when Christ resurrected, and say that one meant his 40 days after his resurrection, this one is nothing. And then in Matthew, you see the story in chapter 12. It says, but the sign of Jonah, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. What have we been told about this? Well, this is in Matthew. We've been told that this means Christ was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. But that's not possible. He was not in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. We have proven here in this ministry that when you go to Luke chapter 24, we know exactly, and we're not the first ones to know that it was only a total of 2.5 days. The issue is, and again, I've seen people teach and understand that he was only in the grave for 1.5 days approximately. But what they'll tell you is they will explain it away, because even though there are some out there that understand he was only in the grave for about 1.5 days, they still have the thinking of Matthew. So to explain away the 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth, they say that Jews will take any portion of one day and call it a whole day, and any portion of this day and any portion of the next. So it was like 6 hours of the first day, then a whole 24 hours, and then 6 hours of the third day, and that was after 3 days and 3 nights. No, it wasn't. Did you not see what it says? 3 days and 3 nights. And all of it was in the grave. Do you see the contradiction that comes up? When somebody literally, I watched a video from a pastor, he literally said it was a day and a half in the grave, and then made it out to think that because the Jews say a portion of a day and a portion of a day, that's a whole day. It doesn't account for 3 days and 3 nights, crystal clear. Because they can't account for it. Do you know why? Because it is a mystery in the Gospels. It did not yet happen. We know that Christ was what? He said, the angel spoke and told them in Luke 24:7, he must be delivered into the hands of sinful men. Comma and, so a separation and now an addition. Be crucified. So he was taken into the hands of sinful men in the evening time of the 14th on Passover. Then in the morning time of Passover, in the daytime portion, he was crucified. Comma and, a separation of event and an addition. The third day, rise again. So it means the third day, the total being the third day means 1 day, 2 days, and then the daylight portion, when the sun rose early in the morning on that third day, it's about 2.5 days that had passed. What people haven't understood, what was the biggest part of the mystery, is that the count began once he was delivered into the hands of sinful men. When did this begin, brothers and sisters? You got it. Judas, right? It all started when Judas came with his men. That's when he was delivered into the hands of sinful men. So we know that the total was only 2.5 days, and that the time in the grave was all of the 15th day, right? He had to be taken down before the Sabbath of the 15th of the month. So he had to be taken down. Then he was in the grave for that entire 24 hours. And then through the evening, 12 hours to early in the morning. So he was only in the grave 2 days and 1 night. That's a huge discrepancy. You can't account for 3 days and 3 nights in the belly or in the heart of the earth. That is because this is prophetic. And this is why it has caused so much distress in so many churches and in people that were maybe coming to believe, in people that started seeking the word and studying it, that came across these discrepancies. And they would go to their pastors, they would go to churches and they'd say, well, how can you explain this? And they would give these explanations that made you scratch your head. And people who were really, who had a sharpness and who sought these things were like, well, that just doesn't make any sense. You can't account for that because of this. And for that reason, some people turned away and said the Bible can't be true. How can nobody know these things? How come there's all these discrepancies? You see, brothers and sisters, this is how powerful these revelations are that we've been given. And it's being given this opening of the books, in particular and especially the Gospels. You see, so now what happens? We know this is relating to a future time. Now, I had, as a little side note, I had this discussion with our brother Mark. I talk to, every week, maybe once or twice for half an hour or so. And we just touch base on things. And one of his questions, and I'm not going to go into all the detail of it now because I'm still assessing it myself. But we know, and this conversation we're talking about, this conversation of Judas is directly related to this. Because we know it's a period of time that we call again in this ministry, that there is a cutting off again that's going to happen with Christ in mid trumpets, right? In that about 10.5 years. So 10 years complete in that 11th year, about 10.5 years total. We know that there's this cutting off coming again. Well, the question becomes, and I'm just going to touch on this. The question becomes, where is this cutting off where it's going to be 3 days and 3 nights before he resurrects? Is it going to be a cutting off taking place right away? Or is he going to be taken into the hands of sinful men again? And what played out over 2.5 days is that really actually the 2.5 years of the second half of trumpets, as you guys know. Okay, so as a little side note, we know this is 10.5 mark when he's cut off. Satan's got 2.5 years, and in those 2.5 years, are those the typology of the 2.5 days? Well, if that's the typology, being taken to the hands of sinful men, then beaten and then killed, and that's the sacrifice of the ox and so forth, is for his resurrection to be after 3 days and 3 nights would mean sometime on the 4th day, that he would have been in the heart of the earth prophetically in the end of days for 3 days and 3 nights, so sometime on the 4th. Well, there's only one place in the end time scripture tied into the 6th trumpet where anybody is dead for at least 3 days and 3 nights. I'm going to leave that, guys. I'm going to leave that there for you guys for now. But some of you already know what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm saying biblically in the end of days, there's only one piece that tells us of anybody dead for more than 3 days and 3 nights. All right? But there's more study that's got to go into that. Now, here's what happens. You see, as you read into this, and we talk about Zechariah chapter 11, okay? This messianic prophecy in Zechariah chapter 11. And they say, you know, it was a twofold. It was something that happened in the time of Zechariah, but he's a prophet, and they would say that it was already fulfilled by Judas Iscariot in the time of Christ. However, as we were saying, how on earth is that possible if Acts chapter 1 says he was the one that purchased it and he fell headlong and burst his bowels and everything else? Only one of them could be true that already happened. And I believe, and in fact, I know it was this one. The one in Acts chapter 1 is the one that actually took place. And it's the one in Matthew that is prophetic. And we can prove this out. Because here's a great example. Not only because it's in Zechariah and it's prophetic, but what do we know? What have you guys heard being taught about Zechariah? As you guys listen to other people on YouTube, or if you listen to pastors, and pastors are talking about the book of Zechariah, where do they place us? I have heard in the past, a few years ago, I remember hearing them teach that Zechariah, they would say that the first 7 chapters are things that already passed, that happened in history, and that's why it has the 70th year, these 70 years, and those 70 years in chapter 7. In this ministry, we know better. We know that these are prophetic for the 7 years of seals and the 7 years of trumpets, just like Hosea. So when you know that everybody else is looking through the lens of Matthew, what do they believe is coming first, brothers and sisters? What do they think is about to happen first? Well, you still have the pre-tribbers that will say, oh, it's the rapture of the church that happens first, right? Of the whole great multitude church. And then they would say it's the 7 years of Jacob's trouble. And what will they tell you comes first? They'll tell you the temple must be built. They'll say it's the temple that has to be built so that once the temple is built, then Antichrist will step in. And when he steps in at mid 7 years, that's the time when this chaos and all of this, the great tribulation part and all the worst of it, you see, they believe what? They believe in the second half. because they don't understand that Mark is to the sleeping church, because everything they study is founded in Matthew. So they think they're going first as the great multitude rapture, and then it's the 7 years of Jacob's trouble. Unfortunately, they think it's seals and trumpets that make up those 7 years. So what has everybody been taught, and what does everybody pretty much teach? Whether you're pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, in a 7-year thinking, they think that it will begin with the temple. They think that it begins with the temple. Well, guess what? If you go to Zechariah chapter 8, this is what they will teach you. That they think 1 through 7 already happened back in the day, and that Zechariah chapter 8 is going to be the rebuilding of the temple that's going to come first. We've taught on this many times. This is absolutely when the rebuilding of the city and the streets and the rebuilding of the temple will take place. But we've been able to prove absolutely with clarity that it's not the beginning of tribulation. It's not a 7-year period, but it's a 14-year period. And that it's the chapter 8, which is the beginning of trumpets with Messiah here and the rebuilding of the city and the streets taking place. And if you say, well, I don't know, I haven't heard very many people teach on that they believe 8 through 14 of Zechariah is actually talking about the 7 years of tribulation. You don't think so? Let me prove it to you. How many times have your prophetic teachers, or prophecy teachers, I should say, go to Zechariah 14 and tell you, here it is. This is when the Lord returns, feet down on the Mount of Olives. When does he return, feet down on the Mount of Olives? They'll say at the end of 7 years. Every single one of them goes to Zechariah chapter 14. Every single one of them goes to Zechariah chapter 14 to tell us prophetically, this is when the Lord will return, feet down on the Mount of Olives. There's no question. Everybody knows Zechariah 14 is prophetic to the Lord returning feet down on the Mount of Olives. So if this is true, and they go to chapter 8, which is 7 years earlier, and they say, see, it starts with the building of the temple. This is when they're going to be brought into the land after maybe some attack has happened, and this peace deal is going to be made, they'll say, and there's going to be this declaration, and they're going to be able to rebuild the temple. This is what every 7-year teaching thinks comes first, after the pre-trib rapture, for those that are pre-trib. They think it's the temple that comes first, which means they don't believe Zechariah's 7 chapters of 8 through 14 have happened yet. There's a reason I'm getting to this. Remember, we're talking about Zechariah 11. So if 8 is the rebuilding and 14 is the Lord returning feet down on the Mount of Olives 7 years later, as they would tell you, then guess what? If you go to Zechariah chapter 11, it must be the midpoint. Doesn't that make sense? If 8 is the rebuilding and 14 is his return feet down on the Mount of Olives, then the midpoint must be the cutting off. The midpoint must be this period of time when, quote unquote, they would say the Antichrist, but we know what the truth is here. We know that what's going on isn't the first 7 years of seals. What is actually going on is the second 7 years of trumpets. And what happens in the 11th year of the tribulation, which is the mid-year of the 7 as the church teaches it to you? They would say this is the time when, quote unquote, Antichrist comes, or Satan. But we know again, Antichrist is here. Satan and Antichrist are here. You've got Antichrist, false prophet, down here. You've got Satan's been cast down, opens the pit. Antichrist comes back. False prophet is there as well. And you got all three of them. We've taught on that, right? So what do you have? They would say this is when this portion happens. So they'll teach you that Zechariah is prophetic in chapters 8 through 14. Well, guess what? If that's true, look what happens. Remember, we recently just talked on this. We know Satan's been cast down, so they're going to be eating the flesh of another. And it says in verse 10, and I took my staff, even beauty, and cut it asunder, that I might break my covenant, which I made with all people, and it was broken in that day. We know this is because Satan has been cast down. Messiah and the rebuilding, the temple that was being rebuilt has been rebuilt, and now there's this breaking of the covenant that he made at the beginning of trumpets, the beginning of the 7 years of trumpets, and he's got to break it, and it's because Satan's been cast down and everything else. We've talked about it. Well, let's read the rest of this. It says, the verse 12, Zechariah 11, verse 12. And I said unto them, if you think good, give me my price. If not, forbear. So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said, and the Lord said unto me, cast it unto the potter, a goodly price that I was prized at of them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord. Well, you see, in Acts, he didn't cast it to anybody. He went and bought it himself. Here, we're seeing the actual 30 pieces. Do you notice in Acts chapter 1, there was no mention of the 30 pieces? In Luke, there was no mention of the 30 pieces. In Mark, there was no mention of the 30 pieces. But in Matthew, we get this completely different account, and then him going to hang himself. And we get the account of 30 pieces being cast into the house of the Lord. Well, we know in the end of days that there is no house being built here. The house doesn't begin to get built until the beginning of trumpets, Zechariah chapter 8. And it's completed after 3.5 years. And then Satan is cast out in what we're reading now. So, are you following what I'm getting at? If this is the 30 pieces of silver, and this is what he was prized at, and it cast into the potter, sent it into the Lord's house, after which is the period of time that the temple was rebuilt. As you read here, the temple was being rebuilt in chapter 8. 3.5 years later, it's rebuilt. So here you are in chapter 11, and he's throwing the coins into the house of the Lord, the silver coins into the house of the Lord. So where is Zechariah chapter 11? Of course, right here. So what are we seeing? We're seeing the exact same thing as the story of Jonah. That it tries to get explained away. They try to explain it away and say that, he hung himself on a tree branch that was hanging over a cliff, and so he shimmied himself on, and then it broke, so he hung himself and his guts splattered open. But before he did, he took the coins, he bought the land, and then took the coins from them and threw them into the house. I mean, this is why there's been so much confusion. This is what has caused so much division. It becomes pretty darn clear when you understand the Gospels and the timeline. You see, look at this same thing we see here. John chapter 18. What's John chapter 18? Same one. The same equivalent time right here. And why is it important? Because in John chapter 18, it's when Judas comes and he betrays him. And John is our relation to chapters to years in a big picture. So what are we seeing? We're seeing things like was and is, both relating to an is to come, just like Ecclesiastes tells us. And this period of time, as I was mentioning earlier, that I'm not really getting into, that talked about that we know that he resurrected on the third day, which was 2.5 days. 2 days passed. The second after 2 days is over is part of the third day. And so 2.5 days, we've seen in many, many scriptures that there are events where days are related to as years. So if the events have already happened, like the transfiguration story, these transfiguration stories relate to years in the end of days. So if we take the resurrection story that was 2.5 days, and it just so happens in the John story, it goes from 18 to 20, covering about 2.5 chapters. You see this period of time of about 2.5 years to when he then returns. But where was the cutting off? Right here, mid trumpets. This cutting off at mid trumpets is being played out by this Judas in the is to come. This hasn't taken place. This is prophetic. This is what I'm trying to explain. That if 8 to 14 is all prophetic, and they've clearly been telling us, because it's the temple being rebuilt, and when the Lord returns feet down on the Mount of Olives, that if this is the cutoff point, and you're seeing the 30 pieces of silver, and the only other place you're seeing the 30 pieces of silver has nothing to do with Mark and Luke's portion, but has to do with Matthew's portion, you start to put the pieces together. You start to realize that the one that took place already was the one in Acts. And that this prophetic is to come is given to us, excuse me, is given to us in Matthew. What is the equivalent of this time in Matthew in relation to the 30 pieces of silver? Right? Excuse me. This equivalent piece of time is, give me a second here, is, of course, Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, in the abomination of desolation, this is it right here. See, this abomination of desolation is when Satan is cast out of heaven, when Messiah's got to be cut off. And this is how he's able to stand in the holy place, because the temple will have been rebuilt. This cutting off right here is where we've been showing it the entire time for years, right here. The middle of trumpets. This is when they're to flee into the wilderness. This is when we shared in the last video. This is the point when the workers, when the 144,000 that were working are bringing in their labors. Remember, in the chapter to year typology of Exodus, we saw the difference from 34 to 23 and the reasoning for the difference. And that the one in 23 is the what they had sown and the labors that they did of the fruit they now bring in, and that's when they're going to fly away on the wings of an eagle at this point right here at the cutting off of Messiah. This portion of time right here is the coins being thrown in to the temple. It is the 30 pieces of silver. It is the time when Judas is going to hang himself. That typology of the one who betrays Christ. Because remember, Christ will have been here in the first half of trumpets on Mount Zion while everything was being rebuilt. And there's going to be a betrayal within the house of Judah. We know this because this is the portion of time for Judah. This exact portion of time equals the exact time of Judas in John 18, the 30 pieces of silver of Matthew 26 into Matthew 27. It's the Zechariah chapter 11. These are still things that are in the is to come. Let me show you another example of this. If we go to Matthew 17, we know Matthew 17 that this after 6 days in the transfiguration story of Matthew, this relates to Christ returning, excuse me, right here. Okay, this is the equation. This is what it equals right here when Jesus comes at the 6th year, 6 days as 6 years of trumpets. We showed how Mark's transfiguration was after the 6 years of seals, and that's why you see him at the end of the 6th seal, and everybody hide our face from him who sits on the throne and so forth. So when you read it here in Matthew, after 6 days, it's the typology of after 6 years. And what do we see? We see something in Matthew that again cannot be something that happened precisely as it's saying, but must have been spoken in a way prophetically, because the description is not found in Mark and is not found in Matthew. It is only found in 2 places in Scripture. Not in Scripture, sorry, in the Gospels. And that is right here in Matthew 17, verse 9. This is related to what again? When he returns feet down on the Mount of Olives after the big picture 20 years, or the 13th year of tribulation, which is also at the end of 6 years of trumpets. So what ends up happening? Here he is, comes down, Mount Transfiguration. What do we know is going to happen? Well, we shared in the last video that this time equals the Matthew 24, when he comes, when they see him coming on the clouds, and it will be as the days of Noah. It represents that final 14th year. So if this is him coming at the end of this, then he's fulfilling this final year. This is what we're reading about. Well, listen to what happens. Verse 9 of Matthew 17. And as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. It's one thing to say risen again, or to be risen, but to say risen again from the dead. Do you know that that term in the Gospels is only used twice? Matthew 17 and John chapter 20. It is the only 2 times that it's used. And do you know what? The exact 2 places it's used are the exact 2 places of Scripture that we show is the direct relation to the after 6 days, right here in Matthew, which means the after 6 years of trumpets. And when you go to John, oh, there it is. John chapter 20 is the exact same period of time. And what does John chapter 20 say? It's the only other place that says in the exact same time frame, for as yet they knew not the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. It's just a coincidence, you think, that the only 2 places in the Gospels that these things are spoken of are both directly related to the exact same portion of time in the end time revelation, in the chapters to years? Of course not. All of these things are directly related to mysteries, brothers and sisters. Every single one of these things are related to mysteries. And this is why when we show these things, when we talk about Matthew 24, we know where it's speaking to. We know it is the 7 years of trumpets. We know this is the Messiah being cut off and then flying on the wings of eagles until the end of trumpets. But that the Lord will come back 2.5 years later, feet down on the Mount of Olives, just as Zechariah said. You see, why is it they cannot understand 1 through 7 is also prophetic for the is to come? Do you know why? Because it's crystal clear. Everything they see, you guys know, comes from the eyes, the perspective of Matthew. So everything they see is not for them, except when they see scriptures about pre-trib, and then others will debate, no, it's mid-trib, and others will debate and say, no, it's actually post-trib. Like we've said, the video in the playlist that talks about the discourses, it's the 12th video. It's about the discourses. It's awesome if you want to understand it. We know that people who debate and say that when they see the Son of Man coming here, when those that say this is post-trib, they're right. They're absolutely right. They're post-trib, not in the sense that it's after 7 years, though. It's after the 13 years. Okay? It's the end of the 6 years of the 13, or of the trumpets portion for Judah. It's not pre, and it's not mid. We've shown that the mid comes from Mark, right? That the mid comes from Mark's discourse. That this abomination of desolation has to do with the church, and the church fleeing because of the time of Antichrist. We know that this abomination of desolation time is equal to a time of approximately Passover. And how do we know this? Because it goes from fall to fall. The tribulation will begin at about the time of the fall feast, or late summer, you could say. But what happens? After the escape of the bride, we got the 50, then you got the first attack on Israel, as we showed a couple videos ago, right? The sword. And then you've got the second attack. When that second attack comes and now they flee from the land, it's now trumpets time. It's the beginning of Tishri. So they're going to be gone for those 7 years. They're going to be removed from the land while everything turns against the church. First, it begins with what? 2.5 years, as we've shown, of World War III. The Antichrist, the raven spirit, the Arab will be here. But it's not till after the first 2.5 years of World War III, which is going to have plagues and famines and disease and death and all of this. But what have we been showing? That when they're to flee into the wilderness is when Antichrist gets his power to continue for 42 months. Well, that'll equal what? 3 years and the half from the third year. Because it's going to be 1 year, 2 years and a half. And then Antichrist gets his power for 3.5, which will take him to the end of the 6th seal, when the Lord is coming on Mount Zion and there's a great battle. You're going to see how awesome this is, because we have shown in this revelation that it means it's around Passover time that they're going to have to flee. This Mark portion in Mark chapter 13, which is this seals portion to the sleeping church, In Mark chapter 13, this abomination of desolation is different. This is going to be the actual mark of the beast and worshiping of the Antichrist time. This is that thing I was telling you at the beginning that's going to come about at this time. This is when this fleeing into the wilderness is going to take place. And it is going to equal the time of Passover. Okay? I'm bringing this up for a reason. Now, as I was pondering and thinking and planning these things out, I was seeking the Lord on these things always, of course. I was in the showers, you guys know, and I'm like, oh, I want to remember that. Holy Spirit, please help me remember. And I didn't remember it last night. It wasn't until earlier today. And that is a very important piece of scripture that I want to share in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We've talked about this before, and it's a lot of fun because you see, the wording is a perfect description of two groups and then takes us directly into Moses that I had not understood before. And this has to do with the story of when they go to the Lord and they say, oh, well, in the resurrection, you know, this woman was married 7 times. Each of her husbands have died. So in the resurrection, which one is going to be her husband? And listen to what he says in Matthew. This is Matthew 22. Jesus answered and said unto them, you do err, not knowing the scriptures, nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. Meaning, the angels of God that are in heaven, meaning these guys are obviously not going to be in heaven. And he tells them what? They do err because they don't know the scriptures. Well, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? I was just talking with my kids about this earlier today. It's interesting that this says they do err not knowing the scriptures, because this is to the Jews. This is to Judah. And you would say, well, man, they know their scriptures pretty good. They know the Old Testament pretty good. And not all of them. They're no different than the church. Don't fool yourself, right? So why is the Lord telling Judah, telling the Jews, they do err not knowing the scriptures? Because they don't know the Gospel of Matthew. They never accepted the New Testament. So they don't have any understanding of this. This is why they do err. And listen what it says, verse 31. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, have you not read that which was spoken unto you by God? You're going to see this is a big difference, an important difference. What do you mean, have you not read that which was spoken to you by God? Well, one, because Judah is the Old Testament, right? And what else? We know that at the end of seals, what's coming at the end of seals? The Lord is coming on Mount Zion, right? What happens if we go to the end of the 6th seal? The end of the 6th year of seals. We know it's hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. What is this portion of time? It's not just Jesus coming, guys. It's not just Jesus coming on heavenly Mount Zion. It's the Father as well. That's why we read it here. The Ancient of Days did sit, whose hair was as white as snow, and his throne was like flame of fire, right? Fiery flame. And we see the thousands of thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Because of Jared, I've got another video. I'm not ready for it yet. I'm doing more digging, but there's more connected to this from what we're being told in Revelation 5. It's very interesting. But what do we see? Well, this is the Father. This is the Ancient of Days. This is the Father. And we know this because then it says, then saw one like the Son of Man come with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days and was brought before him. and he was given his dominion. This is the end of the 6th year of seals. So what we're seeing here is we know that during trumpets, in some form, the Father is there as well. So the wording you're going to see is very different from Mark and different from Luke as well. But you have this, they do err. And this is what we're talking about. What did the Jews believe? The Jews are believing a lot of what the Christians are telling them. And you say, oh, they don't believe what the Christians say. No, they generally don't believe what the Christians say. But what they do want to believe what the Christians say is they want to believe Zechariah chapter 8 is coming next. They want to believe that it's time for the temple to get rebuilt. They believe that when this decree happens, that when this short war happens there, that this rebuilding will take place. So they're in alignment with the Christians in believing that the very next thing that's going to happen, oh, not their escape, not their pre-trib rapture, but that the temple is going to be built. And they believe in the same way the Christians do that this period of time is only a 7-year period of time, and that in their error, because they know not the scriptures, they don't understand. But guess what? If you go to Mark's gospel, look at what you see. The same story, but spoken of differently. You see, guys, you cannot explain these things because of perspective. They are different. And it's because of who they're speaking to. Listen to Mark's. Jesus answering said unto them, do you not err because you know not the scriptures? Well, Mark is speaking to who? To the sleeping church, to the church through seals. Why do you think it says they err? Because they believe Matthew's portion. They think only the 7 years of Matthew's portion. So the Jews not knowing the scriptures, they do err. And the sleeping church, who's not aware, who's not watching and praying and seeking the Lord because they don't understand the season and time, they do err because they're looking at a portion of time that has nothing to do with them. So they're also in error. Their portion of time, as we have taught over and over again, is seals. This is their portion of time where they have erred in not understanding. And in this erring of not understanding, listen to where it speaks differently. For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. So what did you have? You have the angels which are in heaven, and you have in Matthew, which says the angels in heaven. So again, neither of these two groups are equal unto the angels in heaven, meaning they're not with them in an equal way with them in heaven. Well, that makes sense so far, because we know in Matthew, they don't go to heaven. Jews don't go to heaven. God's people aren't going to heaven in Jews' chosen people. Theirs is the kingdom on earth, the kingdom of heaven on earth. So it makes sense that in heaven, they'll be like those angels which are in heaven. But what about Mark? Mark doesn't go to the third heaven. It's part of the kingdom of God, but they don't go to the third heaven. They go to paradise. When the Lord came down, he came down on heavenly Mount Zion. He came on paradise. He came with paradise, the place prepared. So again, they're not in heaven. And listen to what it says. Now this is very different. Verse 26 in Mark, and as touching the dead, that they rise, have you not read? Here it comes. In the book of Moses, Again, he's admonishing them. He's saying, look, have you not read? Right? You do greatly err because you're not reading what's written to you. You do greatly err, and have you not read in the book of Moses? Remember I told you guys that earlier? Just like they would say for Jeremiah. So what is the book of Moses? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Here he is. Are you understanding what's going on here? Here he is talking in Mark's group. He's talking, he's speaking to the sleeping church related to the portion of time of seals. In Matthew's portion, God was there and those things written from God. So the conversation was to the Jews with God being there. What does this one say? Have you not read in the book of Moses? This was awesome. You see, when I was thinking about this and I was asking the Spirit to remind me, I had not remembered that this was the portion speaking to Moses. I wanted to bring up this point of how or why the Lord is condemning them for being wrong, not knowing the scriptures. In Mark and in Matthew, we can show why that is. We have the understanding, the revelation of why that is, and this is what we keep trying to share with people. But what I didn't know was that it also says they erred because they knew not. Have they not read? Did they not understand what Moses told them? And that's what I was telling you was coming. That this portion with Moses is to seals. So have you not read the story of Moses concerning these things? How in the bush God spake unto him? You're going to see why. This is another revelation as to why this says it in Mark. And it's not in a good sense. It's in the sense that they are not aware of it, but that they should have. Why? Because the story of Moses is the details for them in the end of days. The book of Moses, and in particular his life, is the relation to Mark's portion of time, which is the tribulation of seals. Watch this. Look at Luke's. Luke chapter 20. No condemnation to Luke's group, ever. They're always the children of God. They are always watching and ready. Luke 20, verse 30, starting in verse 34. And Jesus answering said unto them, the children of this world marry and are given in marriage, but they which shall be accounted worthy. We know this word, right? This accounted worthy, it's used 4 times, but twice it's counted worthy, and twice it's accounted worthy. The twice of accounted worthy is right here, and of course in Luke chapter 21, verse 36. Watch and pray always that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. Look at what it says. But they which shall be accounted worthy to obtain that world. That's the third heaven, brothers and sisters. And the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, neither can they die any more, for they are equal unto the angels. Do you see anything about heaven? Matthew and Mark said, as those that are in heaven. There is no reference to saying like those angels in heaven. Why? Because those who were accounted worthy to obtain that world, which is the third heaven, are equal unto the angels that are there with them. Listen to what it says. always tying into everything we've always taught. Neither can they die anymore, for they are equal unto the angels and are the children of God. Sound familiar? Of course it does. We've taught on this as well. This is that gap theory, right? The beginning of creation. This is the Luke group. This is that mystery group. Here it is. Romans 8, starting in verse 14. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. Skip to verse 16. The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. We shared this recently, right? Joint heirs with Christ. Who? Those who are the children of God. Who are the children of God? Luke's group. Those who are accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass. And then look at what we get. Now that the dead are raised, even Moses showed at the bush. That's all we get. No condemnation, but we do get a little glimpse of something relating to Moses. Not like Mark. Mark had this condemnation. Have you not read the book of Moses? How in the bush God was there and so forth. So these guys have a condemnation because they didn't understand it. These guys in Luke have this little portion of saying even Moses showed in the bush. So just this little portion relating to Moses. Well, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Because when I didn't plan on this being a tie-in to going into Moses, the Lord knew that the Spirit leading would reveal this connection to Moses. How it related not to Matthew, but it related strongly to Mark, with only a touch for those not being condemned that related to Luke's group. Do you remember how this started? Do you remember in the previous video we touched on this and I said this was something I would build on? And here we are in Exodus chapter 2. Let's go to Exodus chapter 2, which is what? The books of Moses. So you see why it was so important that in Mark, it says, have you not read in the book of Moses, which is the first 5 books? Meaning Moses' period of time, Moses' journey, Moses' story is over at the end of Deuteronomy. His story is over at the end of Deuteronomy, and we're going to get to it. Isn't it interesting that the very next book is Joshua? Do you think that's just random? That Mark is being accused of not having understood what Moses was saying, and that Moses' book goes all the way to the end of Deuteronomy, and when it's over, the portion of the sleeping church, the Mark portion is over, and Moses wasn't the one that was able to bring them into the promised land. It was Joshua, who we know was Yeshua, which we'll talk on in a moment. You see that? These are the reasons for these ways of scripture being written. Within them, what's it called? In Isaiah, here a little, there a little, right? That's what it is. All of these things being revealed, pieces and parts, and understanding these overall pictures and how they're directly relating to the revelation of the end of days. Watch this. Exodus chapter 2. Of course, you guys know we shared this just recently. I think it was in the last video. This incredible connection that was shared in the forum. For those, quick side note, for those wanting to know what I'm talking about when I say the forum, when you go to Ministry Revealed, we've got over 900 people in there. in the forum, in Ministry Revealed. You just click on the menu, you can click on forum, and you can join us in there. It'll take you a few seconds to sign up. It's free. We're sharing all sorts of things in there, scripture and revelation and prayers and news and info and things going on around the world. We're sharing everything in there. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about sharing in the forum. So this had been shared in the forum about this incredible connection. Remember what we're talking about. If we take this now in order and we say Luke, Mark, Matthew. Well, now we're not going into the Matthew portion. We've completed that other portion in relation to Matthew and this initial connection that we were showing in the difference between the two Judases. That's what's going on. There's a future Judas that was built into the conversation, speaking about a future, just as was the resurrection from the dead, just as was the story of Jonah and so forth. Okay, over and over and over again. So now what we're going to see is this conversation of Luke then going into Mark. We know Luke's portion are those that are accounted worthy. Those that are accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. We know it's there in that story, and we know it's there from the actual description in Luke's discourse that these guys will escape all these things. So we saw in the story of the 7 wives and those that would be accounted worthy of that world had a little description in relation to Moses, but it wasn't a tongue lashing, if you will, description coming against them. It was just a simple thing about Moses. Well, that simple connection is the start. That's it. You see, we showed in the last video how this is directly related to Luke chapter 1, because Moses' father, being from the house of Levi, took a wife of the daughter of Levi. What happened in the Gospel of John? In the Gospel of Luke chapter 1, with John's dad being a Levite and his mother being of the tribe of Aaron. They're both Levites. Okay? Same typology going on. And what do we know about the story of Luke chapter 1, which is the same typology? We know that the bride is going to be taken either on day 1 or most likely on the 8th day, which is the day of circumcision for John in Luke chapter 1. We talked about all these things many times, including in the last video, and how this relates to when the bride is gone, when it's the story of the ark in relation to the 40 days only. The bride is gone, and bam, the 40 days will begin, which will be those 40 days that we spoke about in Luke chapter 11, which when he will literally be, as Jonah was, warning of the devastation that will begin once this time is up, which is what? He's warning like Luke chapter 21's discourse, letting them know when they see that they're being compassed, they had better flee, because this first attack is coming upon them. So this is why we say I believe that it's probably going to be after 7 days, which is on the 8th day of which is the circumcision, directly related to Luke 1 and John as Moses. Remember, what happens at the end of the story of Moses, at the end of the book of Moses? He dies. He dies and doesn't get to bring them into the promised land. What happens in John? What happens with John the Baptist? When Messiah comes, he anoints him, then he gets taken into prison, and before Jesus' ministry can officially begin, Moses is beheaded. He's killed. Before what? Well, the exact same typology is the end of days. He's going to come towards the end. He's going to restore families together, which had been separated and come against each other during the time of seals. He's going to restore families. And then Christ, what happens? He comes and it's Messiah. It's Yeshua who takes them into the promised land. Not the John typology, not the John as Elijah, not Moses. You see, we've shown these things through the Gospels. We've shown these things through the chapters to years. Now we're going to show them in the life in these books of these two characters. And this is precisely related, as we shared in the last video, that Moses, they believed, was born in the first week or two of of Adar, which is the 12th month. So 3 months later would be the month of Sivan, which is the precise month we've been talking about as the escape of the bride of Christ, which is Luke chapter 1. And what happens in that 3rd month? She couldn't hide him any longer. What happened? She built an ark. She doubted it with slime and pitched and put the child therein. Okay? And put him in. This is like the bride right here. This is the bride being put in. Got to change that color. This is the bride being put in. And bang. The bride is now gone. Luke chapter 1, the 8th day, the bride is gone, the circumcision, bang. And what happens? The door is shut and the 40 days begin of the Son of Man. This was that simple portion that I was telling you in relation to the accounted worthy portion of Luke's description here with neither marrying nor given in marriage, but those that are the children of God and so forth. No condemnation, just that little starting point that had a piece with Moses. But what about Mark? Mark is the story. Mark is actually the end times of the entire life story of Moses. Remember, this is now where we talk about these big pictures of events that are played out over the 14 years. But in this case, we know it just goes to the end of seals. Right to here. Relates to the end of seals. This is that story where Moses is involved and his entire life is related from what? Well, we just saw it from his birth. We just saw it from his birth at the escape of the bride of Christ. Why? Because the bride is the first fruits of the church, is the 10% portion that comes out from the church that's not ready. That's why we had this little piece of Moses. But as we follow the story now we're going to see this whole book of Moses and everything related to Moses that these guys didn't understand. And this is where the intensity, and we're not going to go into all the details. I mean, these are details that can go on for days in teaching them. And this is something where you guys, as you guys begin to understand this, you guys will now be able to see with your end time eyes these events and give greater understanding and greater detail to what might be taking place during the time of seals. And in a future video, and knowing ahead of time that the story of Joshua is related to trumpets, not in chapters to years either, but in the events of his life, you're going to see how that directly relates. And you guys can go into these books yourselves and pull out details to help give greater understanding what is about to happen in the end of days, just as this has done for us so far. It's each one of them giving different details within those periods of time. Right? That's what this is doing. So now watch this. Let's go into Exodus chapter 3. In Exodus chapter 3, we see right off the bat, look at this. And the angel of the Lord, let me go into my wonderful eSword all lit up. See, where did I want to go? Like I said, I'm not going to touch on every single detail. But what do we see? Now Moses is grown up, right? It says, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. Well, isn't that interesting? Have you not read in the book of Moses how in the bush God spake unto him? You seeing these connections? Directly speaking to Mark's group. Because Moses is over the house of Israel, brothers and sisters. He is the relation to the house of Israel. And I'm going to prove it out even more for you. And it says, and the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Remember what's going to happen, brothers and sisters. You see, it ends up saying, come now, therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh. You come to find out that Pharaoh, as I spoke in the beginning of the video, Pharaoh was even worse than Babylon. And in the end, we see these typologies of Pharaoh. We see these typologies of the king of Babylon. These are the portions of seals. So what's going to happen? Pharaoh was even worse, and to that point, Pharaoh was terrible. But what do we find out from the Gospels? What do we find out about this portion relating to Moses in the portion of seals, to the Mark group? We find out that when this period of time of Pharaoh that begins right off the bat, you see, you're going to have nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. What's going to happen? Famines, earthquake, troubles, the roilings of water, sorrows, pains, travails. And what happens? They're going to be brought up before councils, beaten. Just like Pharaoh, the ruler of the free world at that time, right? The biggest king of all at the time. Well, this time it's going to be related to the time of the Antichrist. Remember, he's going to be here. He's not going to be the full one in charge yet, but he's going to be here. This is during World War III. Yet, persecution picking up against Christians. We showed it in the book, remember? In the relation to the 7 churches. Right after the time of the 40 days, or even during the 40 days, look what happens. The 40 days, you could say, and the first 2.5 years of seals. Persecution began. Israel's wanderings. This is just the first 2.5 years of seals. That's the typology right here. So just like Moses and the Lord saying, hey, I'm going to send you to my people because they're suffering under Pharaoh, who is the worst, who is destroying my people, who's going after them. And what ends up happening? When he goes to them, you're going to see as we get there, but we see this persecution taking place, right? Right off the bat, during the time even of the nation against nation. And then what ends up happening? The abomination of desolation. This one in Mark, we know is about the mark of the beast. This abomination of desolation is when this modern day Pharaoh, this Antichrist, this worse than Pharaoh even was, now takes his power and authority, which we have proven through the end of day revelation is about 2.5 years in from Tishri of this year, which would put it 2.5 years from then at the time of Passover, when they've got to flee. this period of time of fleeing is right here. Pergamum, right? The age of Constantine, another one who was like a pharaoh, who was like a king of Babylon, who was bringing about this crazy persecution. And what happens? Wilderness. This is the time now of the fleeing into the wilderness. This is that Mark 13 abomination of desolation and now fleeing into the wilderness. How does this relate to what happens next in relation to big events taking place in Moses' life? God is saying, look, I've been seeing this persecution, all of this taking place on my people, or you can say the house of Israel. He says, you've got to go and do something. So you follow into this storyline, and we go to Exodus chapter 12. And what do we see in Exodus chapter 12? Let's go right up to Exodus chapter 12. And what do we see? In Exodus chapter 12, we see the continued story of Moses now. We fast forwarded a bit, and what is it? He goes there, and it's the time of Passover. He's been saying, let my people go, let my people go. And what's happened? All of these plagues have been getting released. All of these plagues have been getting released. Have you guys ever wondered when the plagues, when this typology of the 10 plagues would be released? I know I did. I'd been trying to understand for a long time and just left it in the background because I wasn't sure where they were going to take place. It would appear these are the plagues that take place during the first half of seals, because Moses' story is to seals. And when he goes and says, let my people go, remember, it's all typologies. It's all in the types and shadows. What does he do? These plagues get released against them. So while the enemy is attacking the Christians and the church and World War III and all this craziness is going on, these plagues are also being released. We saw that there was famine. We see that there's going to be death and killing of children and everything going on. So what period of time is this at the Passover? You got it. This is when Moses now has said, hey, let my people go. The plagues have taken place. And they're about to be released, right? They're about to be released to be able to let go. Well, the typology is what we were showing in relation to the churches. This is when Antichrist is going to get his power to continue 42 months. And it's going to be the exact portion of time when they're to flee into the wilderness. What happens here? It's Passover time. And what does he tell them to do? And they shall take, in Exodus chapter 12, verse 7, and they shall take the blood and strike it on the two posts, on the side of the two posts, and upon the door, upon the houses. And we know that then the time of unleavened bread is coming. See? And strike it. We've talked about this strike, right? We've talked about it. Let's keep going. We'll get to it in a moment. Thus shall you eat it, and with your loins girded about, your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste, because we know that the death of the firstborn is coming, right? Exodus 12, verse 17. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this self same day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall you observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. Verse 18. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month. 7 days. Remember? 7, 1, 7. This isn't that 7 yet. This is when they flee first, all right? But everything related to this group, to the church group, is connected to Passover. Remember, guys, in the 7:1:7 revelation, The beginning was Moses, right? And the time of the ark. That's the one day. That is the escape. That's the middle. That's the gold. Then we know that the rapture group is related to Passover. Because when Christ came, he came to save this group of Mark. So that's why everything to them is related to Passover. And it says 7 days, which is the unleavened bread. All right, the time of Passover. And it says, then Moses called for the elders of Israel and said unto them, take out a lamb according to your families and kill the Passover. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood of the basin and strike the lintel of the posts of your doors with the blood. What is all of this going on? Why is this striking with the blood and everything else? Because as you guys know who have been here for a while, excuse me, you know that this relates to Moses and Aaron. We showed how this word fetch was also directly related to the period of time of the 18 and 11 that we shared about earlier, that this was the again strike that's coming against the Son of Man. And what we're talking about though here isn't the one in the again that's coming. We're talking about the one related to Moses. This one here is related to Aaron's strike. Now, what am I talking about? Aaron and Moses. Moses was told by the Lord to speak to the rock. He was told to speak to the rock. And what did he do? He said, must we, him and his brother, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And then he said, he lifted up his hand with the rod and he smote the rock twice. So what did he do? He struck the rock twice. Moses is responsible for one. Aaron is the one responsible for the second one. This second one is the one that we related in the previous videos with the word fetch, which relates to this future mid-trumpets, as we were talking earlier, the 30 coins, the 30 pieces of silver, this second Judas typology. It was a prophetic thing built into the story for the is to come. That's this fetch, and it's the one related to Aaron. However, do you understand that, yes, it was God's plan. Yes, it was known for Moses and Aaron to do this. But the reason for the crucifixion of the first and second was because of the striking of the rock twice. But was it part of the plan? Yes, it was part of the plan. There was going to be no other way for salvation, of course, because man is so sinful. So yes, it was part of the plan. But this is where it became revealed, that he wasn't only going to be struck once, but he was going to be struck twice, once because of Moses and once because of Aaron. So where was this striking related to? Passover. Passover. So if it was related to Passover, and this is the one Moses related, and it's the striking, where do you think it's related to? It's related to the group that Christ came for in the first place, which is the Mark group, the house of Israel, the sleeping church grafted in. This is precisely the correlation to Mark chapter 13. The exact correlation to Mark chapter 13. And what's Moses doing? He's about to what? Take them into the wilderness. They're going to flee away. And when they flee, the 10th plague, there it is. There's the final 10th plague. And then what happens? They're going to chase them, right? Then the Antichrist, the Exodus takes place, and Pharaoh is going to go after this multitude. You see, because they weren't just Israelites. What is this mixed multitude? Well, it's related to Arabs, right? Arabia. So what is it? A mixed multitude went up also with them. Because why? It relates to Gentiles. It's the house of Israel with the Gentiles grafted in. It is precisely who Christ came to save. And it was the responsibility because of Moses with this first strike. And Moses is the typology over this group related during the time of seals. It's so awesome. When you guys come to see the second portion that's going to relate to come on now, to Joshua, it's unbelievable. It's so beautiful. It's so revealing. Okay. So now, where are we at this point? Well, we're at Exodus 12 at the time of Passover, which is precisely the 2.5 year time frame of the abomination of desolation when they're fleeing, because now Antichrist is being given his power, and this is when the craziness kicks in, and he's going to be going after them, just like Pharaoh. But what does Scripture tell you about this guy? What does Scripture tell you about this portion of time? For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of creation, which God created unto this time. Worse than all of the others before. This Antichrist character, when he goes after them, just as Pharaoh turned and went after Moses and the mixed multitude that were with them. It's perfectly in alignment, guys. And what happens at this time? Remember, this is related to Mark. So if it's related to Mark and it's related to Moses, it's related to the group that Christ came for and who died and who resurrected, and it was related to Passover, and it was related to Moses in the first strike. What else would it be equivalent to? This is so awesome. What else would this be equivalent to? Well, we know during seals, the temple, the physical stone temple isn't rebuilt yet. So what temple is this about? Where is this standing where it ought not? Well, we know it's the mark of the beast. So during the time of Moses, what was the temple, brothers and sisters? What was the temple? It was a temple of skins. A temple of skins is the tabernacle of Moses. The abomination of desolation is they're fleeing. See, because God is what? Dwelling in them still. The Spirit of God is inside the temple of flesh, which is still directly 100% related to the abomination of desolation spoken of in Mark from Daniel. Because we know Daniel has 2 abominations, one in chapter 11 and one in chapter 12. We've got a video on that as well. So now what happens? We get to the story of Exodus chapter 25. And in Exodus chapter 25, what is it? The Lord's telling them, and for the rest of Exodus, you have this story of the tabernacle, the sanctuary that the Lord's going to dwell in. And what is this sanctuary? I'm pinching myself. It's the flesh. Because we're still in that age of seals. It is still the house of flesh, the tabernacle of flesh. I told you it's all directly related to Moses. Well, now we go into Deuteronomy. We're going to go into towards the end here. We're speeding through a bunch of it. And when we get to what? The end of the book of Moses, or toward the end of the book of Moses, which is just like it said in Mark's portion, because they knew not the book of Moses. And here we are coming to the end of the book of Moses, starting in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 2. And he said unto them, I am 120 years old this day. I can no more go out and come in. as the Lord hath said unto me, thou shalt not go over this Jordan. And the Lord thy God, he will go over before thee. Hello. Isn't that precisely what we showed? What happens at the end of the sixth seal? The Lord's there. He's come down on heavenly Mount Zion. He's there first. And what does he do? What does he do when he comes? He destroys all of them who are coming against him. Remember, we get this even in the Apocrypha, in 2nd Esdras. This is the escape. This is nation against nation. And then these things that happen during seals. And then it says, then they shall see him coming, right? When he's going to be revealed, they're going to see him coming. And it says, and an innumerable multitude shall be gathered together as you saw, desiring to come to conquer him. But he shall stand on the top of Mount Zion, and Zion shall come to be made manifest, prepared and built. Okay, the place prepared. This is Mount Zion, paradise. As you saw, the mountain carved without hands. And these nations will gather against him to come and destroy him, and he's going to destroy them. We got the exact same story being given. And listen to what it says. The Lord thy God will go over before thee, Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 3. And he will destroy these nations from before thee. It's exactly right. You see, if we go into Zechariah again, you go to Zechariah 14, you see it says right here, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, the city which is taken and ravished, and have the city. Come to verse 3. It says, then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when, past tense, as when he fought in the day of battle. So this is another battle coming when he comes feet down on the Mount of Olives at the end of trumpets. But it says here that he had already fought another one. This other one is Ezekiel chapter 39. Everybody loves to say the Ezekiel 38-39 war. Every single time you hear the church talk about these things, guys, you know that they, unbeknownst to them, are talking about the end of seals to the beginning of trumpets. They think that the Ezekiel 39 war is what begins everything. That it's the Ezekiel 39 war, and then it's the rapture, and then they'll rebuild. Because they're always seeing from a perspective of Matthew, but they are unaware. This is what this is all about that I'm sharing with you in relation to Moses. They are unaware of these books of Moses. Oh, you might say, oh, well, they've been reading. They have no understanding. Am I saying it? No, I showed you the scripture that said it. I showed you the scripture that said it. Let's go back. So he's saying, again, Deuteronomy 31:3. And he will destroy these nations from before thee, and thou shalt possess them. And Joshua shall go over before thee, as the Lord hath said. And Joshua shall go over before thee, as the Lord hath said. That gets pretty interesting now, doesn't it? Watch this. Remember this in Numbers chapter 13? Again, book of Moses, chapters 13, Numbers 13, what happens? Sends the spies into Canaan. Okay, so when they're about to go back into the land, right? The Lord's coming, he's going to destroy it first. But what does he do? There was Osee, who is Hosea. Hosea is the deliverer. This is Jesus. Okay? Hosea. Osee is Hosea, the deliverer who got victory. Okay? He was the one, the escape of the bride of Christ was done by Hosea, Osee, Yeshua. And he's what? The son of Nun. This was part of an incredible revelation as to how we understood there was 50 days, 14 years. The attacks would begin. And then it would be the 50th Jubilee. Listen what happens. Numbers chapter 13, verse 16. These are the names of the men which Moses sent out to spy the land, and Moses called Osi, so he changes Hosea's name. Osi, or Hosea, the son of Nun, Yeshua. He changed his name from Hosea or Osi to Yeshua. Yeshua. That's Jesus. Yeshua. Now we know it means for Joshua, but here in this one context, I think twice in scripture, does it actually use the word Yeshua? Yahushua, right? This is literally Jesus in the definition, in the description. So we know that his name was changed. Okay? When does it get changed? When the portion of Hosea is over. When the portion of the Gentile is over. So, let's keep reading. It's Yeshua, it's Jesus who is going to go over. First, it's the Lord, the Father, and then it's Yeshua, Joshua. He'll go over before thee as well. Oh, doesn't that sound familiar? Let's go back to Daniel chapter 7. Remember in Daniel chapter 7, after World War III, right? The first, second, third beast, then the Antichrist, which is the fourth beast. He has that 42 months of reign. And then what? The Ancient of Days. So who came first? The Father. The Father came. And then what happened? Antichrist was killed. And the Son of Man came in the clouds of heaven to the Father, to the Ancient of Days. And Yeshua was given dominion and power and glory, was given his kingdom. It's the beginning time of trumpets. It's precisely what Deuteronomy 31 is telling us at the precise time that it equals. Father comes, destroys them, then Yeshua comes, and he's the one that will bring the rapture group in. See? And thou shalt possess them, the land. This is the story that we showed with Abraham in relation to Hebrews chapter 11. That's the portion. He's looking for a place where the foundation was built. Right? And then they're going to start rebuilding on that foundation, just like Zechariah chapter 8. Because it's the beginning. The end of seals has come, and the beginning of trumpets is at hand. Listen to what it says now. A lot of people have wondered about the Ark of the Covenant. That is the Ark of the Covenant going to reappear? And there's so many thoughts and questions as to where it might be and what's going on now. Well, whether they found it, whether we know they can't touch it yet. So wherever it might be, we know that scripture also tells us that there's going to become a period of time when it won't even enter the thoughts of people, of men. Because of what? Devastation. The Jews will have been removed from the land, and then craziness comes against the Christians and against the church all over the world during this time of greatest revival. So the Ark of the Covenant is not going to be anywhere on the thought of men. But now look at where it happens. Here we are. This is the end of seals portion. Moses is getting close to the point where he's got to die, where Joshua is being anointed. And he's going to be the one, Yeshua is going to be the one to bring them into the land after the fathers destroyed them, destroyed those that were against them. And here's what it says. And Moses wrote, Deuteronomy 31 starting 9. And Moses wrote this law and delivered it unto the priests, the sons of Levi. So he delivers it to the priests, the sons of Levi. Hello. Hello. The 144,000 typology. Those that are sealed at the end of the sixth seal. Here he is delivering it unto them. And what does it say? Which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord unto the elders of Israel. Verse 10, and Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years. How many years are left after this? 7 more years. Hello. At the end of every 7 years, in the solemnity of the year of release, in the Feast of Tabernacles. when the next 7 years come to an end and the Lord is returned, in the revelation of 717, the 1 was the pre-trib escape. The 7, which is Moses' group, which relates to the unleavened bread and the portion of Moses, and when they flee into the wilderness. Well, we know the rapture, when it comes in, will also be in the middle of about the middle of the 7th year of seals. In chapter 7, right? In chapter 7 of Revelation, with them waving the palm branches and everything else, that will be at the time of Passover, because that's the new harvest that can't go until what? Day 2 of Passover, which is what? The beginning of unleavened bread. So this, we know that that's the middle of the 7th year. So the rest of it takes you to what? The fall feasts. So 7 years later, when the Lord returns, what is it? Tabernacles. It's the other 7, the 717. It's now that final 7 after the next 7 years that are left when the Lord returns, and it's Tabernacles, the 7-day feast. This is just awesome. There's so much, guys, we can keep taking out of this. It'll blow your mind. All right. Let me see if there was anything in that I still wanted to show. Let me see, year of release. All right. Now we go to the end. Now let's go to the end. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 34. Check this out. Deuteronomy 34 is now what? We're now at the end. We're coming to the end of it all, guys. Here we are in Deuteronomy chapter 34, and it's the time of the death of Moses. Listen to this. It says, and Moses went up into the plains of Moab and to the mountain of Nebo. So he's telling all the name of these places over against Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead unto Dan and Naphtali. Do you see what's happening? He's showing them and explaining all the land that they're going to be going into, but that Moses can't go into, of course. And what happens? Well, there's no description, just the names of the lands. And this one is over against this one, and he showed him that one. And then listen to what happens. Let's continue in verse 2. And all of Naphtali and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh and all the land of Judah unto the utmost sea. And then listen to this. And the south and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, hello, unto Zoar. So none of them have a description relating to what they represent, who, the type that they represent, except one. And its relation is to tell us about palm trees. Well, isn't that interesting? Because this is what? This is coming towards the end of, towards the end of seals. Moses is about to die. Joshua is about to take over, which means the rapture is about to come in. And look at what it says. Out of all the cities, there's one described as palm trees. Do you know why? Because in Revelation chapter 7, after the 144,000 are sealed, it's time for the great multitude rapture that will take place in the 7th year of seals, which will be at about the midpoint of that 7th year, which will be the time of Passover, just like we said. And what happens? And after this, it says, after this, I beheld, and lo, a great multitude which no man could number, of all nations and kindred and people and tongue, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. Guys, you cannot put this together. Piece after piece directly related to where it should be in the revelation of the end of days, over and over and over again, if it wasn't spirit-led truth. It's the absolute truth, guys. This is the revelation. Let me show you an example. Remember the triumphal entry? Remember what it says about these guys? This is only in Mark, in the same group. And what does the triumphal entry relate to that we've shown in the Revelation? The end of 6 years of seals. So when he comes at the end of the 6th year of seals, the time of the rapture comes, and look at what it says. And many spread their garments in the way, and others cut down branches off of trees. These were the guys that were trampled flat. What were they cutting down branches of? Palm. They were the ones with the palm branches. Over and over and over again, guys. Let's finish up. 34. I love that, man. It's those little things that when you know these past revelations, when you see these little mentions like this, you say, oh my goodness, I know exactly where that's speaking to. Deuteronomy 34:4. And the Lord said unto him, this is the land which I swear unto Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, saying, I will give thee unto thy seed, and with thine eyes thou shalt not see. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died. Bam. Moses is now dead. They mourn him for 30 days, and look at what happens. And Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him, and the children of Israel hearkened unto him and said, as the Lord commanded Moses. And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Whom the Lord knew face to face. And where is this? The end of the tribulation. And what else do we see? They were screaming what? Hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne. Who was the one who got to be before the face of the Lord? Moses, who was over this group. And this group is that group that Jesus came to save when he says, I came not but for the house of Israel. And who is it that gets saved in all of this? After that destruction by the Father, and the Lord is come, and he goes after the Father into the land. When Yahushua, Joshua goes into the land next, he then brings them. He brings all of those, like it says in 2nd Esdras 13, verse 39. And as for you, seeing him gather to himself another multitude that was peaceful, these are the 10 tribes which were led from their own land into captivity in the days of King Hosea, whom Shalmaneser, the king of Assyrians, led captive. Who? The ones Jesus came for. The 10 tribes. Which brings us right to the end of seals and the time of Israel's kings. Who is Israel's king at this point? You got it, brothers and sisters. Joshua. Yeshua. Yeshua, Joshua, the Lord and Savior, having come down on heavenly Mount Zion, who is represented as we know, Joshua, Yeshua. Do you see that? Brothers and sisters, this is the revelation of the understanding of Moses' journey and life, of his book, of his entire book related to the portion of his life that is over the house of Israel, for which caused the first strike that came against Christ in his death and then resurrection, which was related to Passover, who is the group he came for in the first place, which is Mark, the sleeping church, the house of Israel, the Gentiles grafted in, and the whole story is connected to Moses, the first strike, Passover, when they flee into the wilderness, and Passover, when they will be crossed over into the land that they've been promised by Yeshua, Joshua himself, which we will cover then in the next video. Brothers and sisters, it was a long one, but I pray it blesses you. We have just been getting so much exciting revelation, so much incredible insight to all of these open books. It is just mind-blowing. And now you guys have more detail, more pieces of scripture to go and dig into yourselves and see and understand with greater detail who, when, where, what is connected to this portion of time in seals, and in the future to trumpets when you go into the book of Joshua as well. And I will cover that, I believe, prayerfully, God willing, in the next video. I love you, brothers and sisters. God bless you. God bless your families. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.